We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is David Morgan, founder of the Morgan Report. David, thanks for joining me today.
Tom, it's great to be with you. Thanks.
So, David, we both recently interviewed Dr. Judy Shelton. So I wanted to start today by having a little bit of a discussion about what you learned from your conversation with her and kind of compare notes in a way. That's something that you kind of proposed to me. And I think it's important, especially at this time, especially seemingly a very pivotal time for the US, both politically and monetarily, let's say. So what were some of your biggest takeaways from that conversation?
I think the number one, Tom, would be her heart, that she really does care. And from my perspective, there aren't that many in government, and she's really not in government service, but she was looking to be, in the board of governors of the Federal Reserve, as we both know. But she really cares. And I think the number one, succinctly said, is that money has a moral obligation. Mm-hmm. And this is something very, very seldom talked about, especially someone at her level with a PhD and, maybe becoming a member of the Federal Reserve Board at some point in time. So that, I think, is really important because, my life's work is based around, freedom first and, honest money and how honest money really supports freedom. But my mission statement, as you've heard, is to teach and empower people to understand the benefits of an honest monetary system. It benefits everyone when it's a moral obligation, and $1 today is $1 tomorrow, and it's $1 10, 20, and 30 years from now. Mm-hmm. And when you have the reliability and stability in the monetary system, that's an equal playing field as well as it can be in the human experience. She gets that. Mm-hmm. That's very important. Most people don't ever get on the philosophical side of money and why it's that important, but it's a moral contract. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm overemphasizing it. That's how I saw it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of, kind of the way that her confirmation or lack thereof, the voting, what was it, the Senate or Congress that went through that? She was attacked for having quote unquote radical views on money. Like, why do you think that is?
Undereducation. I mean, if people really understood the monetary system and what money has worked in times past and what hasn't, they wouldn't have pushed back on her as hard. In fact, they would have embraced what she said. Mm-hmm. And this is just lack of understanding. The idea that, we know better than everybody else kind of an attitude, especially from a lot of bureaucracies in any government, your government, our government, most governments. And this just gets to become dogma. And it really isn't based in fact. It's because we've always done it that way and an attitude. So she was given, as we both read the book, late in the session where she was allowed to basically express her views. And it sounds like she just hit it out of the park and kept it very simplified, very real, and very understandable, and why an honest system is really important. Mm-hmm. And so kudos to her. But it is, so it's just that. If we were really given an education, we meaning our country, your country, the world, then I think we would have a much better world, because it really starts with knowledge. And if you're giving, garbage in, garbage out, if you're taught to believe rather than how to think, we're doing a disservice to our children worldwide. Mm-hmm.
David, what do you think the road is to impose some type of monetary discipline or fiscal discipline on the current government? She mentions the idea of long-term gold bonds. Do you think that's the best way to kind of go about imposing some type of restraint on spending?
Let me state emphatically, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of my friend Hugo Salinas Price. He wanted to put silver into circulation alongside the peso. And he talked about it in the terms of opening up the door a little bit and just stepping into it and giving people a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, the most likely scenario would be Gresham's law would take hold. People would save in silver and spend in pesos.
Mm-hmm.
I said that to say this. It's probably one of the best approaches that's practical to go ahead and say, hey, day after tomorrow, we're going to revalue gold. It's going to be equal to the base money supply or maybe the Jim Rickards model, which is fine. I'm not really addicted to one exact scenario or another. My point is that we overnight change it. Well, everyone that owns gold is probably going to get a windfall. And people that didn't own gold are going to feel like, well, why not me too? I'm cheated. So a lot of the people will just be so asleep it won't even understand what just took place. But that would be a radical change, and I think harder to accept. Whereas her proposal is to put the debt markets basically in a standard that everyone can see if you are inflating too much or you're not, based on a gold bond versus just a regular bond, which one has the better value at the end of a 10, 20, 30, and I think she even mentioned perhaps 50-year time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good step. I don't have a better idea. I'll put it that way. I also just reiterate what I said a moment ago. I think a radical overnight bank stop, go back to a pseudo gold standard, a direct gold standard somewhere in there. I think it would be such a radical change that I don't think it would be. I think it caused a lot of problems, unfortunately. I mean, and I don't know an easier step into it than what Judy has proposed.
Mm-hmm. Part of what you had kind of brought up to me was this idea of a bimetallic standard or putting silver alongside that. What role do you think silver needs to play in, making that shift? And is it in some ways essential?
Well, I brought up the paper that I referred to, which is gold standard equals fiat in disguise. If you type that into a search engine, you'll find that paper.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument that Jay and Tagla makes is that when you measure on a mono standard only, you only measure in terms of paper. So gold could go to infinity in terms of paper. Whereas if it's measured in pieces of silver, silver is kind of a policeman on the inflation of gold. So in other words, they balance each other out. And the mistake that's been made in the past with bimetallism is that there's been a fixed ratio, and that's incorrect. You need to have a floating exchange where 15 silvers equal an ounce of gold, or 16, or 17, or 23, or whatever the number is. But that would put a restriction on the value of gold and silver together. You could even go as far as a trimetallic standard and use copper, silver, and gold. It's used to be, one of the monetary systems that was, pretty pervasive worldwide. So basically, he makes the argument that if you just go on one, if you only can measure it against paper, then what are you really doing to yourself? You can print to infinity, so gold's worth infinity. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Can't print silver. And so I liked the argument. I brought it to her. I thought we got a pretty good discussion on that. Should silver be in a monetary system? I would say you should have I'm very favorable to bimetallic. I really think you should have both. But would that be practical or not? Yes and no. Absolutely not at today's ratio, because silver is so worthless relative to gold for monetary purposes that it wouldn't have any effect. If you look at the world financial system, gold represents 1% of the financial system. Silver represents 0.02% of the financial system. So you would have to get back to a gold silver ratio of probably the classic monetary ratio of 15-1. That's not how it comes out of the ground, people. Or maybe a 10-1, where silver's worth 1/10 the amount of gold. If you did that, and if you let the free market derive the price, it'd probably come back to the natural ratio, which is 7-1. Mm-hmm. So 7 ounces of silver by an ounce of gold, which is how it comes out of the ground right now. If that were to be established, then it would have a monetary role. but as a 85 to 1, it's not worth enough to be pertinent to the monetary system.
Mhm. David, what role do you think the Fed currently plays? And the reason I ask that question is because, with Trump being elected, obviously there was that interaction between Elon Musk and Dr. Ron Paul as well about, seriously looking at what role the Fed needs to play going forward. So, is there some room, do you think, to abolish the Fed as Dr. Ron Paul wants to?
I do think that you could abolish it. I think really it should have never started. I think that the monetary policy by the Constitution is set by the Treasury. So the Treasury could take over the role of the Fed. What does the Fed do? The Fed sets basically the discount window. They set the interbank rates, but they do a lot more than that now because they've learned or decided that they can do Operation Twist. They can buy up certain dates of the long bond and bring the yield curve into normalcy, or then it gets out of hand. And there are different things they can do with their connections to the banking system and everything else. So they have a lot of power, but they don't have as much power as a lot of people give to them because commercial banks create most of the money because it's for car loans and house loans. There's an asset there. The bank creates money out of nothing by having you sign a contract. It goes into circulation and away you go. So they have a lot of power, but again, not as much. And the market itself, I still think, has more power than the Fed, as hard as that is to believe. But it's gotten out of hand, and people put ideas about what the Fed can and cannot do, just like what the president can and cannot do,
Mhm.
into what I call la la land. These are ideas that people have because they're told that these things can take place, and the president will wave a magic wand and make two phone calls and the war ends. And these things are rather impractical. So I would be very favorable to the Fed just easing out, going back to the Treasury and the Treasury. Now, would that guarantee more monetary sanity than what we've seen in the past? Initially, no, because they would be inheriting all the Federal Reserve notes and all of a sudden their Treasury bills uh, responsible by the government directly instead of a private banking cartel. So it'd be a tough one, Tom. I've thought about this for years, as you know, and I've never had the answer where Morgan has a solution, and that's the title of my book
Mhm.
because I don't.
Mhm.
But I think the best approach is what we talked about a moment ago, where you take a kind of a gradual approach. When I was asked to be a nominee for a White House fellowship, I wrote a policy paper on figuring out or straightening out the Social Security system and basically outline a gradual approach where everyone that's at this age and above stayed in the current system, and everyone was at this age or below had a choice. They could stay in the system or they could contribute to their own well-being through their own savings. And
Mhm.
the idea of IRAs and that type of thing were proposed in my solution. And I think that's kind of the approach we would take here, where we have to shift to the new system, but not stepping off a cliff and all of a sudden you land and there's a new system. You have two broken legs if you do that. So um, that's my idea.
Mhm. Well, in that vein, David, as we go forward here, are CBDCs something that you're, worried about in the short to medium term, this implementation of one?
Absolutely. We didn't talk about this off air and we talked about a few things, but my whole speech at the New Orleans Investment Conference was the new monetary system. And I went right to the top because that's the best place to start. So I went from the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, and exactly what they have on their website. I basically read it a couple times, digested it, and made up basically an outline with bullet points of exactly what the Bank of International Settlements proposes for central bank digital currencies.
Mhm.
And there's already been two or three case studies that have been performed. So, these people are not, they're smart. And, anything in the human realm, it really pays to test it first. Like in the motorcycle world, I mean, you got a new bike, you're going to the test crew is going to check it out before they put it on the market, make sure that the design meets the road like it's designed to do. And maybe they find out the springs are too stiff or, whatever it is. So back on point, I think that's in our works. It scares me very much. I don't like the idea. And yet, if you, and the way I presented it was as objective as I could. I mean, there are benefits to it, cross border payments, instantaneous account change. You send me X amount of Canadian dollars and it shows up in my account, 2 milliseconds later. There are benefits to it, but the overall control is crazy. And of course, they talk about privacy, and small transactions wouldn't be traced, but larger ones would. And of course, they don't give a cutoff point. And I made a joke during my lecture. I said, yeah, right, because they could trace everything. And, Morgan's eating too many candy bars and borderline diabetic. So I go to buy another one. I've got, I said this during the lecture. I hope people take this right. I say, since I'm a billionaire, I could buy another candy bar. Well, there's a guy falling asleep in the lecture right in front of me when I said I'm a billionaire. And he woke up like that. And I said, sir, I'm not a billionaire, but you're falling asleep. I just wanted to wake you up. And everybody in the room started laughing. But the point is, no, they'll trace everything, and it's going to be social credit and all the things we've talked about. I won't drone on, Tom, but I do not like it. I think there should be pushback, but it is what the bankers, really want to see.
Mm-hmm. So, David, do you have any hope in Trump's cabinet picks for meaningful change for the country?
Right now, no. I mean, there's a few. I think Kash Patel's the real deal. I think Vivek and Elon are technocrats. They're big on AI. I wrote about that in my report, my private work, and I talked about it during this conference, and I talked about it a lot in the workshop. And there'll be a lot of good that comes out of that, to slash a lot of the bureaucracy and all that will be very beneficial to, people in the U.S. But on balance, if we're still pushing toward a digital ID and a new banking system, all this other stuff is window dressing. It might be better to get your Social Security check easier with dealing with an AI instead of having to stand in line for 3 hours, or get your driver's license talking to a kiosk and getting a new photo and getting it 5 minutes later rather than waiting in line for 2 hours. And a lot of social services things that are very difficult now, time wise and frustration wise, will be cleaned up and save money and be more efficient. And those things will be great. But at what cost? If you've got to get your DNA put into the system for you in order to stay in the banking system, or you're out, that's a heavy price to pay for more convenience. So I'm concerned about it. I know it sounds radical, but I've always thought outside the box, Tom. And where this thing's going, people like me, and I'm certainly not the only one, and there's people that have thought further out than I have and been accurate, but it's like, oh, geez, those guys have got their foil hat on again. But, time goes by. Oh, my goodness, they're right. Oh, my goodness, they're right. Not that they don't make mistakes and get it right every time. Mm-hmm. It's just that I see the trend and the direction of the trend. And it's really not a communist takeover. It's a technocratic takeover. It's where the AI or the science is there. And because the science says that you need to be eating a certain amount of whatever calories, is better for your health, could well be. But regardless, it gives the free will, freedom of choice goes out the window if Big Brother tells you what you can and can't have for lunch.
Mm-hmm. David, I saw a story this morning about the Parliament in France looking at taxing unrealized gains on dormant assets like crypto, unused real estate, and luxury goods. The article did not include gold or silver at this point. So I would think this road leads there, but do you think this is just a way to kind of keep you in the system and using those forms of money?
I do. I think it is. I think, these people are control freaks. I mean, they've used money as a means of control for a very long time. And, you can go deep down the rabbit hole without going too deep. You look at the United States and you say, well, the president has all this power. No, the lobbyists have all the power. And the lobbyists buy the senators and the Congress critters for the most part. and to be beholden to where they got their funding through the lobbyists, and therefore they vote in certain ways, which usually are what the lobbyists want them to do. And so that's one of many issues we have here in this country that really need to be cleaned up, and whether they will under the new administration or not remains to be determined. I have my doubts, but we'll see. But no, it's a way to keep everybody in the system. And then, as those things break down or whatever, maybe there will be a run to gold. Maybe the bankers want to run to gold. I don't know. Maybe the big plan is to propose a CBDC and watch it fail, and then put up a gold backing behind that and run it through again. The main thing is if you have, freedom or not. And that's what you want to look at in the new monetary system. If it's more control than we already see, bad choice. If it's more freedom than we already have, good choice. Unfortunately, I don't see any of the bank's proposal going toward us having more freedom, even though they talk about privacy as I just outlined. But I don't really see a solution there, Tom, other than the system being reset on the terms of private banking by private individuals. I'm going to digress, but I think it's important for your viewers because I know you have a really good following, as you should. If you go look at, I think it's on Netflix, it's called Bank of Dave or The Bank of Dave. And it talks about a guy in the UK named Dave that got the first new banking, I guess, mandate from like 150 years. It's basically a community bank that serves the community, and banks make money. And he takes minimum salary. I don't think he takes any for himself, but people that have to go to work every day get paid. But the surplus basically goes to the community. So they have a better food bank, a better, housing for the poor, whatever. In other words, they give a lot of the proceeds into the community, which is what banking could be. I mean, banking in and of itself is not necessarily evil. It depends who's running the bank and what they do with it. But it's gotten so out of hand and so corrupted that it's corrupted the whole system, going back to the lobbyists. If you can pay enough money to get somebody to vote a certain way, then what kind of freedom is that? Maybe their conscience would do something different. And we know this. We know not only observing the amount of money that goes into the pockets of these people in the political class, but we also know the constituency says, I don't want to vote like that. You represent me. 80% of our county wants X, and you vote Y every time. You're not representing the people, which is supposed to be a representative government. You're supposed to vote the way we want you to vote. And of course, that's gone by and by over many years.
Mm-hmm. David, with your long-term experience in the silver market, what do you think is important to consider and keep in mind for investors that don't have the same experience as you do?
Well, I think having over expectations, and I've probably been guilty of giving people too big an expectations of silver. I really, in 2003, I said silver would make it to triple digit. I still think it will, but it really has been so demonetized that it hasn't really kept pace with what I thought it would. I've read a lot and I think a lot, but it doesn't make me right. I think it's still very important. I mean, in a worst case scenario where there is a bank closure or your bank is closed and you have some silver coins, you're in a lot better shape than if you didn't, depending on the circumstances. But I think it's important for everybody to own a little bit of silver and gold. You don't have to overdo it, but it is the money of last resort. It's easy to teach a 6-year-old what a silver coin is and convince them pretty easily it has value and work from there. I would say that with the technological age, that silver will still be moving up, as Steve St. Angelo has pointed out many times, along the production curve cost. I mean, silver is just over the cost of production right now. There has to be a margin in there. You would be out of the silver mining business. Whether it will catch the last wave and become perceived as a monetary asset or not remains to be determined. I fully expect that it will. I do think that, gold gets so expensive that most people can't afford it. They'll run to silver. And the attributes of silver are far superior to gold as far as its actual usefulness in, in the world at large. But I think the main thing is over expectation. Again, I could, give myself a bit of a bow out and say, yeah, I remember saying, and it was true early on. I mean, I made the statement that gold will preserve your wealth, but silver could make you wealthy. I didn't say it would. And if you go back to 2000 and 2011, I mean, silver did outperform gold. And that was, would it make you wealthy? That depends. I mean, I did a trade in silver and the last run up from the 19 level up to 48. Showed that trade to my paid members, and I had people that retired for life on that trade. So it made them wealthy. Did it make everybody? So, the word could is not the word would. But
Mhm.
I probably went down the weeds too far, Tom, but that's my statement.
Well, that's why I appreciate your long-term view on this, and that's why I asked the question that way, because it's what comes to your mind that I'm appreciative of and searching for.
Yeah.
Um, but do you think it's important to be, let's say, looking towards what countries like China, Russia, or India, for example, are doing and how they treat gold and silver and how and why they're buying these metals?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at monetary history, the adage, he who owns the gold makes the rules. So if you look at where the most, Austrians look at capital as means of production. Who creates the most wealth? So you go back pre-US, it was the UK, it was United Kingdom that, empire the sun never set on, the empire of the United Kingdom. Well, even though they were an island, they still had the most productive capacity and they owned the most gold. Then after the war, all the gold came to the United States, and the United States had the most productive capacity. Now, not all the gold, but a great amount of gold has gone to Asia, China in particular, and they have the greatest productive capacity. So basically, those that manufacture and produce the most in real assets, meaning, food, manufactured goods, food, that type of thing, is the wealthiest because that's real economic activity, and they seem to acquire the most gold during that process. So we only have to look that far at a very rudimentary, elementary level and follow the gold and see who's the most productive and who owns it and why. The
Mhm.
most productive, the UK. Then the most productive, US, the most gold. Now China, the most gold. So I think that's definitely making the foundational argument of what you asked me. Well, how do they look at it? They look at it probably close to the way the late great Jim Dines said. I mean, John Dines quoted himself saying, or I'm quoting him saying, that gold is the monetary hitching post of the universe. There's nothing more stable than a gold standard, or really, in my view, a bimetallic standard. But regardless, I think they get it, and I think that they're prepared to perhaps go into a some type of gold-based monetary system. Having said that, I want to contradict myself because I dive deep, as you know, and this ISO 222 basically aligns all nations, with the BRICS being aligned with this edict that this is how the new monetary system is going to work, and basically everything is connected, BRICS or no BRICS.
Mhm.
So I have my concern now whether the BRICS actually broke off from that international agreement or not. I don't know. Could I don't want to go too far in conjecture here, but I'm concerned that basically it's one big club. We're not in it. It's bankers and bankers and bankers, regardless of where they're domiciled. And looking, I think, at the BIS as I outlined earlier is a good way to look at the tip top and get a pretty good idea. But I do think, I mean, people rebel. There could be the BRICS, in back room or whatever, saying, you know what, if this thing doesn't work, we have a backup, and the backup's called gold. So I don't know.
David, what advice would you give to those that are interested in platinum or palladium?
Well, I heard a lot at the New Orleans investment conference about platinum, which really surprised me because I've been bullish on platinum now for some time. I think if you own gold and silver and you're pretty well off, you should own some platinum. It's a very small market. I wrote about it in this month's report. You may or may not know, Tom, but the Chinese have just come out with a platinum bar for investment purposes. And there's a lot of Chinese, 1.4 billion people. Not that all of them are going to buy platinum,
Mhm.
but it doesn't take a very big percentage of that many people to buy platinum and move the market. And then you have the one-offs with the hydrogen economy and what can be done on the industrial side with platinum. That are mostly proposals right now. They're studies. It's not guaranteed that we're going to use a lot of platinum in the future for high-tech solutions, but we could. So I like it, and since it comes 70% from South Africa, and they have problems with politics, they have problem with electricity, they have problem with platinum mining, and the fact that I studied the book "You Can't Lose Trading Commodities," which I brought up in the speaker room, and a couple of people came over to me and got some more information. But in that book, it's very simple. You can't lose trading commodities simply states that if you could buy any commodity, cocoa, cotton, or platinum, under the cost of what the producer produces it for, and you have patience, you will make money. Right now, most platinum producers are around 1,200. You're buying it around 1,000. So I winked at this guy that also bought some platinum and said, "Look, we're the best platinum miners in this room because we bought platinum for 1,000, mining it for 1,200. We're the best mining companies that exist right now."
Crazy business model when you can buy the refined and finished product for less than it costs somebody else to produce it. David, what role do you think sentiment is playing right now in the metals complex? And is it a really important barometer for you to keep a pulse on?
It is. It's a hard one. I mean, there are sentiment indicators that are pretty good, but I made a lot of mistakes, and I continue to make hopefully fewer mistakes. But my idea of having kind of a strong math background and all that I grew up learning or thought I was learning, I thought I could always beat the market based on math, and you can't. Jim Dines taught me a lot, and one of his second or third books was on the psychology of markets. And what I determined from that book and others in further study is that markets move on emotion. They really don't move on math. Yes, you can make a case, and Buffett's pretty good about payback time and all these things you can do with math formulas. But overall, sentiment, psychology. I mean, the New Orleans Gold Conference is a good example. It's the 50th anniversary. We're making new highs in gold. I really expected more enthusiasm than was present at the show. I think it's cautiously optimistic. It wasn't down in the dumps, but it was far from what I would expect if Bitcoin was at that conference and making those new highs. It would have been a whole different amount of energy in those rooms than what you saw with gold, recently making new highs.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if the sector's just reached saturation at this point. And I think the crypto world that'll have something to do with it too. I think a lot of people that are looking for strong gains are looking at the crypto market, and rather than put money in the gold, which is really a preservation of wealth more than a capital gains situation. Looking at these other alternatives, and a lot of money that might have gone into gold and silver had an opportunity to go into a whole different sector. And that crypto sector has absorbed a great deal of investment funds. And that's the way it is. I'm free market. I can't say, hey, it's wrong or you shouldn't or couldn't. It's your choice. Personally, I think some of these whales up in the Bitcoin maxi world ought to rethink it a little bit and maybe preserve some of that wealth into the, money of 5,000 years. But, that's the way I think, not necessarily the way they think.
Right. David, what are you working on right now, and what are you looking forward to for the next year or so?
Yeah, I've been working for about a year on this documentary. It's called Silver Sunrise, and it's a passion, Tom. I decided not to write another book. People really don't read that much. I ran 1,000 copies of Silver Manifesto, and God, I forget what it took. A couple of years to basically sell them out. And then I decided to make another run of another 1,000 copies. And it took a couple more years to sell those out. But a film, especially if you do it right, can touch a lot more people a lot more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
People see it together, so they come out of the theater or the living room or whatever, and they discuss it right then and there. So anyway, I'm doing this documentary called The Silver Sunrise. I'm taking a little bit different look at the monetary question, more about the stress it produces in people. If you look up what's the number one stressor worldwide? You'll see that money is the stressor like 85% of the time. Leads to a lot of divorce, leads to a lot of job insecurity, a lot of things. So Silver Sunrise delves into the idea of stress, fear, and the control that money exerts over our lives. And despite its essential role in society, many feel enslaved by money. We ask the question that explores the emotional and mental toll, questioning why money drives everything from love affairs and conflicts to the fall and rise of empires. Silver Sunrise sheds light on the manipulation of money by governments and banking cartels, hell bent on exploiting civilization with endless debt, perpetual wars, and unjust enrichment. And by better understanding the monetary system and how we are corrupted, the film enables one to postulate a new, brighter future, one without the overwhelming stress, fear, and control associated with money. So that's the kind of synopsis of the film. All the interviews have been accomplished, and all the filming's done. The script has been done. You can go learn more at silversunrise.tv. There are several trailers on the ensuing pages. Edward Griffin is on there. Foster Gamble, who did Thrive 1 and 2. Dr. Edwin Vieira, who's probably the premier constitutional lawyer in the United States, is there. Ron Paul's in it. Myself, Ellen Brown, who wrote Web of Debt. Mark Passio, who teaches natural law. Larkin Rose, who's one of the best free market thinkers I know of. So it's been quite a project, Tom. A lot of effort, and but the purpose. I wouldn't stack it up against my friend, I'll say dear friend, Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money, and that's a whole series. But for someone at a different level than Mike, I put heart and soul into this, and hopefully it'll be very, very beneficial to not only our community, but the goal being well beyond our community. That maybe our community takes it and gives a DVD or presents it to their children or grandchildren or nephews and nieces and that type of thing. Because really, as we started our interview with, it's the education. What's lacking? It's being undereducated about money. If you really understand it, it's not a hard concept. The hard concept is it's been corrupted. And now we have a system where you get something for nothing. It's time to get back to where you get something for something. Your labor is worth something, and you receive value for your labor. It's really that simple.
So we can look for that sometime early next year? Yeah,
we were shooting probably by Christmas. I don't think we can finish. We had, as I explained, I'm not going to do it in public, but we had a few snags. It's true in any project, any business. There's always problems. And so because of that, a couple of delays, probably going to be in the beginning of next year. I'm shooting for first quarter next year.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to it. And the name of that again is Silver Sunrise, right?
Yeah, and the URL is silversunrise.tv.
Excellent. And for anybody that wants more of David's material, that's all available at themorganreport.com. And of course, always excellent Twitter follow at silverguru22. David, any thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just think at the end of the year here, as we're getting into the holiday season, Merry Christmas is what I would say, but I understand there's other people with other belief systems, which I honor. I just think, the overall fundamental principle that all of them, talk about, and of course, murder is wrong, and, we have these wars. I think it's time to reflect, I look at what you have, not what you have. And what that statement means is, what do we have together as humanity, and in my belief system, most people are truly good. And I think it's good to look for the good in others rather than the differences, because, we all have a heart and it all beats. And I think we got to get back in tune with each other and leave the political class to them. I would say to themselves, but don't expect another human to necessarily make the best outcome. I think relying on other people may not be what we need at this point in time. I think some self-reliance or more self-reliance is important. And I think being true to yourself is important. And I think that looking for what you can do. The Gandhi saying, be the change you wish to see in the world. Because if you want peace, you've got to be peaceful. If you want joy, you've got to give out joy. If you want more happiness, be more happy. If you want to see more gratitude, be grateful for what you do have. I think these are qualities that we need to look at more, looking in the mirror than looking outside of ourselves for a solution, because I really don't trust the political class very much. I do believe in the human spirit a great deal. So hopefully I made that clear, Tom, but thank you again for having me on your program.
It's always a pleasure, David, and always a real privilege to get your insights and what you're thinking about. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.